Welcome to Timeless Bible Journeys.
Have you ever wondered what it truly means to be wise? Not just smart, not just knowledgeable, but wise. The kind of wisdom that shapes nations, influences generations, and is remembered for thousands of years? There was once a man who possessed such wisdom, a king whose name became legendary, a ruler so powerful that his kingdom flourished beyond imagination. And yet, despite his unmatched intellect, despite all his wealth and glory, his story did not end in triumph. This is the story of King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, yet a man whose downfall was as great as his rise. The Bible paints a complex picture of Solomon. He was a son, a king, a poet, a builder, a philosopher. He wrote words that still guide us today. He built a temple that became the heart of a nation. His wisdom solved disputes, his leadership brought prosperity, and his presence drew rulers from distant lands. But in the end, wisdom alone was not enough. Solomon had everything, yet he lost himself along the way. Why? What happened? And what can we learn from his story? Stay with me as we explore the rise and fall of King Solomon, the man who had it all, but still wanted more. And before we dive in, if you find stories like this fascinating, don't forget to like, share, and comment. Now let's begin. The path to the throne. Power is never given freely. It must be seized, defended, and secured. And in the ancient world, even the throne of Israel was no exception. Solomon was not the obvious choice to be king. He was not the eldest son of David, nor was he a battle-hardened warrior like some of his brothers. His claim to the throne was not uncontested, and his journey to kingship was filled with political intrigue, ambition, and ultimately bloodshed. As King David grew old, his health declined, and a crisis loomed over the kingdom. Who would succeed him? In those days, the firstborn son was typically the rightful heir, and Adonijah, David's eldest surviving son, believed the throne was his by birthright. Without waiting for his father's decision, Adonijah took matters into his own hands. He gathered an army, formed alliances with powerful figures like Joab, David's military commander, and Abiathar the priest, and declared himself king. For a moment it seemed like Israel had a new ruler. But Solomon had powerful allies of his own. The prophet Nathan, one of David's most trusted spiritual advisors, saw the danger in Adonijah's rebellion. He knew that David had once promised the throne to Solomon, the son of Bathsheba. And so Nathan and Bathsheba acted swiftly, approaching the ailing King David and reminding him of his vow. David, though weak, did not hesitate. He commanded that Solomon be anointed king immediately. And in a dramatic moment before Adonijah could consolidate power, Solomon was crowned as the rightful ruler of Israel. The news spread like wildfire. Trumpets blared, the people rejoiced, and Adonijah's supporters panicked. The celebration of Solomon's coronation echoed through the city, and Adonijah's claim to the throne crumbled before his eyes. But Solomon's troubles were far from over. Though he had the crown, he still had to secure his rule. And in the brutal world of ancient kingship, mercy was a rare commodity. At first, Solomon spared Adonijah's life, allowing him to live under the condition that he would never attempt to reclaim power. But Adonijah was not one to accept defeat so easily. Soon after, he made a calculated move, one that would cost him his life. He requested to marry Abishag, a young woman who had served King David in his final days. This might seem like an innocent request, but in the politics of the time, it was a direct challenge to Solomon's authority. Marrying a former king's concubine was often seen as a claim to the throne itself. Solomon saw through the deception, and this time there would be no second chance. Adonijah was executed. Joab, the once loyal military commander who had sided with Adonijah, met the same fate. Solomon ordered his death, eliminating a key threat to his reign. Even Abiathar, the priest who had supported Adonijah, was stripped of his title and exiled. With these decisive actions, Solomon solidified his rule. He had proven that he was not just a king by inheritance, but a ruler who could defend his throne. But now, the question remained, what kind of king would he become? Would he follow in the footsteps of his father, King David, a man after God's own heart? Or would the power that he had fought so hard to secure ultimately consume him? The answer to that question was yet to unfold. A gift unlike any other. Every king desires power. Most seek wealth, control, and victory over their enemies. But what if a ruler could have anything, literally anything, he wanted? What would he choose? For Solomon, this was not just a fantasy. It was a divine opportunity. One night, after securing his throne, Solomon traveled to Gibeon, a sacred place of worship. There he offered 1,000 burnt sacrifices to God, an extravagant act of devotion. That night as he slept, something extraordinary happened. God appeared to him in a dream and said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Imagine that. The creator of the universe granting you one wish. No conditions, no limits. What would you ask for? Riches? Power? A long and prosperous life? Solomon could have chosen any of these. He was a young king, ruling a vast and complex kingdom. His enemies still lurked, waiting for a moment of weakness. He could have asked for victory in battle, unlimited wealth, or the downfall of those who opposed him. But he didn't. Instead, Solomon humbly replied, "Lord, you have made me king in place of my father, David. But I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong." He asked for wisdom, not for himself, not for personal gain, but for the good of his people. And God was pleased, because Solomon had asked for wisdom instead of riches or revenge. God granted him more than he had imagined. He gave Solomon a mind unlike any other, unmatched wisdom, discernment, and understanding. But that wasn't all. As a bonus, God also granted him wealth, honor, and long life, on the condition that Solomon would remain faithful and obedient. When Solomon awoke, he realized that this was no ordinary dream. It was a divine encounter that would define the rest of his life. But would his wisdom truly set him apart? Would it be enough to lead a kingdom? The answer would soon be put to the test, because not long after, Solomon faced one of the most famous cases in history, a judgment that would cement his reputation as the wisest man to ever live. The famous judgment. Wisdom is not just about knowledge. It's about understanding human nature. And soon, Solomon's wisdom would be tested in a way that would define his reign forever. One day, 2 women came before the king, both claiming to be the mother of the same baby. Their faces were etched with desperation, their voices filled with anguish. They stood before Solomon, pleading for justice. The first woman stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "My lord, this woman and I live in the same house. We both gave birth to a son around the same time. But one night, her baby died. While I was sleeping, she took my living son and placed her dead child in my arms. When I woke up, I knew it wasn't my baby, but she refuses to return my son." The second woman shook her head fiercely. "No, the living child is mine, and the dead child is hers." There were no witnesses, no evidence, no way to prove who was telling the truth. Most rulers would have been trapped by this dilemma, unable to render a fair judgment. But Solomon was not like most rulers. He studied the women carefully, weighing their words. Then he did something shocking. He called for a sword. The courtroom fell silent. "Cut the child in two," Solomon declared. "Give half to one woman and half to the other." Gasps filled the room. Was this truly the wisdom of Solomon? Was he willing to kill an innocent child to resolve a dispute? Then something remarkable happened. One of the women cried out, "No, my lord, please, give her the baby. Do not harm him." The other woman, however, remained unmoved. "Yes, divide him. If I cannot have him, neither can she." And in that moment, Solomon had his answer. "Give the baby to the first woman," he proclaimed. "She is the true mother." The real mother would rather lose her child than see him harmed. Word of Solomon's wisdom spread throughout Israel and beyond. People marveled at his ability to see beyond words, beyond deception, straight into the hearts of men. This was no ordinary king. This was a ruler with divine understanding. But wisdom alone would not guarantee a righteous reign. With power and wealth came new challenges, new temptations. Solomon had passed this test, but would he pass the ones yet to come? The Golden Age of Israel. With wisdom beyond measure, King Solomon ushered in an era unlike any before. A time of peace, prosperity, and splendor. This reign became the pinnacle of Israel's history. A golden age where the nation flourished in wealth, culture, and influence. Solomon's kingdom stretched far and wide, with trade routes reaching distant lands. Gold, silver, precious stones, and exotic goods poured into Israel. Cedar from Lebanon, ivory from Africa, spices from Arabia. Solomon's wealth was legendary. He forged powerful alliances, securing peace with neighboring nations, ensuring that, unlike his father David, he ruled not through war, but through diplomacy. But among all his achievements, one stood above the rest. Solomon set out to build something that had never been built before. A temple, a sacred place where the people of Israel could worship their God. For generations, the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object in Israel's faith, had no permanent home. But now, under Solomon's rule, that would change. He spared no expense. The finest craftsmen were brought in. Cedar from the mountains of Lebanon was used for the structure. Gold overlaid the walls, gleaming in the sunlight. Massive stone blocks formed the foundation, cut with such precision that no tool was heard at the construction site. The temple was a masterpiece, a testament to Solomon's devotion and the grandeur of his kingdom. After 7 years, the work was complete. And on the day of its dedication, Solomon stood before the people and prayed. He did not ask for more riches, more power, or greater conquests. Instead, he asked for God's presence to dwell among his people. Fire came down from heaven. The temple was filled with the glory of the Lord. And at that moment, Israel was at its peak, a nation united, blessed, and at peace. But prosperity can be a double-edged sword. With great wealth came great temptation. With absolute power came the risk of corruption. For now, Solomon was at his height, the greatest king Israel had ever known. But as history has often shown, even the greatest rulers are not immune to their own weaknesses. And for Solomon, his greatest test was yet to come. The downfall begins. For years, Solomon's wisdom had guided his people. His wealth had made Israel the envy of nations. His kingdom stood at the height of its power. But prosperity has a way of making even the strongest leaders complacent. And for Solomon, his greatest enemy was not an invading army or a political rival. It was his own heart. Power, when unchecked, leads to indulgence. And Solomon had more power than any king before him. The Bible tells us that Solomon loved many foreign women. Women from nations that God had warned Israel against intermingling with. These were not just marriages of love. They were political alliances, deals made to secure peace with surrounding kingdoms. The Moabites, Ammonites, Sidonians, Egyptians. Solomon took wives from them all. Not one, not 10, not even 100, 700 wives, 300 concubines, and with them came their gods. At first, Solomon may have justified it. A small shrine here, a little altar there. What harm could it do? After all, he was still the king who had built the temple of the Lord. But slowly, little by little, his heart drifted. The man who had once prayed for wisdom began to act foolishly. Solomon built high places for pagan gods: Ashtoreth, Milcom, Chemosh, Molech. He allowed sacrifices to be made to them, turning away from the very God who had blessed him with everything. The commandments he once upheld, the faith he once defended, now seemed like distant memories. And God saw it all. The Lord had appeared to Solomon twice, had spoken to him directly, yet Solomon still turned away. And so God passed judgment. "Since you have not kept my covenant," the Lord declared, "I will tear the kingdom away from you. But for the sake of your father David, I will not do it in your lifetime. Instead, I will take it from your son." The consequences of Solomon's choices were already beginning to unfold. Enemies rose against him, rebellions sparked. The peace he had once secured was starting to fracture. His wisdom had once been his greatest strength. But in the end, wisdom without obedience was not enough. And though Solomon still sat on his throne, his kingdom was already slipping from his grasp. The golden age of Israel was coming to an end. The lessons of Solomon. Solomon's life is a paradox. He was the wisest man who ever lived, yet he made some of the most foolish mistakes. He built the grandest temple for God, yet he also built altars for false gods. He received divine wisdom, yet he allowed his desires to lead him astray. So what can we learn from his story? First, wisdom alone is not enough. Knowledge and intelligence can help us make good decisions, but without discipline and faithfulness, even the wisest can fall. Solomon had the gift of wisdom, but he failed to apply it in his personal life. He knew right from wrong, yet he allowed his heart to be led away. Second, success can be dangerous. Solomon had everything: wealth, power, influence. And yet it was these very things that led to his downfall. The more he accumulated, the more he became dependent on his own strength rather than on God. True success isn't just about gaining power or riches. It's about staying grounded in what truly matters. Third, small compromises lead to great failures. Solomon didn't turn away from God all at once. It happened gradually. A political marriage here, a small shrine there. Little by little, his heart drifted. It's a reminder that the greatest failures in life don't always happen in a single moment. They happen in a series of small, seemingly insignificant choices. And finally, legacy is more than what we build. It's what we leave behind. Solomon built a magnificent temple, a powerful kingdom, and a name that would be remembered for generations. But in the end, his kingdom was divided. His wealth was scattered. His descendants suffered because of his choices. So ask yourself, what kind of legacy are you building? Are you chasing after temporary success? Or are you investing in something that will last beyond your lifetime? Are you staying true to your principles? Or are you slowly allowing small compromises to lead you away from what you know is right? Solomon's story is not just a lesson from the past. It's a warning for the present, because in the end, wisdom, wealth, and power mean nothing if we forget the one who gave them to us. So, what do you think about King Solomon's story? Do you believe wisdom alone is enough to lead a successful life? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into biblical history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more fascinating stories from the past. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay wise.